Hello friends, thanks for joining me. Today I'm rounding up all of the 10 books that I read in July, and without further ado we're just gonna get straight into it. So the first book that I read in July was kindly sent to me, a physical arc, would you believe, by Vintage Books, and that book was A Short Walk Through a Wild World by Douglas Westerbeek. This book has been compared with a mixture of The Life of Pi and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and that kind of sounded like a bit of me, so I requested it and they very kindly sent it along to me. We follow a girl named Aubrey Torvell. We follow her through a long duration over the course of her life. When Aubrey Torvell is 9, she contracts this mysterious illness that nobody knows about, nobody's ever heard about before, and nobody understands. And what happens is she becomes very sick and very unwell and will die if she remains in the same place for too long. So Aubrey spends her life traveling from place to place, never stopping for longer than about 3 or 4 days. The prose in this is generally quite lovely and I found it really readable. I won't lie, there was a part that kind of sticks in my brain. It left me cringing quite a bit. There's a mention of a woman with cleavage as deep as the sea, and that just stuck in my brain. Maybe not for the most positive reasons, but overall the writing in this book is actually really great. Because of the nature of this story, we don't get a whole lot of characters sticking around for too long because Aubrey has to move so often. And because of that, the only character that we really get to know quite well is Aubrey, but that is understandable given the nature of this story. So if you're looking for a book that's very heavy on the development of character interactions over a period of time, this isn't the book for you, but don't let it put you off. Otherwise, I actually found it really engaging and I didn't mind that characters were coming and going because it was part of the nature of this really unusual story. As you would expect, we travel all over the world with Aubrey and we meet her in many different stages and times of her life, and we get little vignettes of her interactions with different people and different places. It's really quite an unusual concept for a story and one that I generally did quite enjoy. I definitely understand the comparison with Addie LaRue and The Life of Pi. It feels really strange and there are quite a few questions that are left unanswered, but overall I did really enjoy this and I'm very grateful to Vintage for sending this to me, and it is out now so you can go buy it as we speak. Next up then is a book that is well renowned and controversially won the Booker Prize in 2019, and that book is The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. So this book is a follow-up to the infamous Handmaid's Tale, and we are set 15 years after the events of the first book occurred. There was a lot of questioning around the time of this book's publication whether or not this book actually needed to be written, whether it deserved to be written, and whether an author should write a story just because they can. Obviously, The Handmaid's Tale left some questions unanswered and people really did want to know what came next, and some say that Margaret Atwood caved under the pressure, and others would say that the story was just rattling around inside her and that this one actually did need to be told. Personally, I actually really enjoyed this book. Aside from whether or not it should have been written, who am I to say, but I actually really quite enjoyed it. We follow 3 different female characters set in Gilead, and we get to learn quite a lot more about this dystopian society and its inner workings from this book. Each protagonist has sort of a different view and a different insight into this world. Tonally, it felt quite different to The Handmaid's Tale, which maybe you would expect because it was published so long before this was published in 2019. I felt as though The Handmaid's Tale did really great character work and it probably did prioritise character more so over plot, whereas I feel this book is very much plot driven rather than character driven. The Handmaid's Tale to me felt much more claustrophobic, much more atmospheric, and I suppose that's probably largely because we follow just one character by the name of Offred in the first book, whereas we get a few different perspectives in this book. Maybe this book wasn't necessary overall, but generally I really did enjoy the reading experience, and for me this one was very much a page turner. As an aside, I will say that if you're going to pick this one up, I would be checking the trigger warnings just in case. Next up then, I read an Angela Carter book, and interestingly I have 2 Angela Carter books on my bookshelves that I haven't read yet, and I did intend on reading one of those. And I decided, hey, I'll listen to it on audio, which I did, but somehow ended up accidentally listening to a completely different Angela Carter book than I intended on listening to. But I'm not complaining, because that book was The Magic Toy Shop. And in this quite strange and weird and wonderful novel, we follow the lives of 3 children who are sent to live with their strange uncle after a really tragic event occurs. Their uncle is a really difficult and brooding man, and he provides a life for the children that is largely devoid of warmth or joy. But thankfully his lovely wife and her 2 brothers are there to come to the rescue of these children. It's a very gothic feeling novel. It's very typical of Angela Carter. It's really imaginative and dark and strange, and we find echoes of old fairy tales throughout. It's not as simple as it might first seem, and it does get quite dark. The prose is really enchanting, really engaging, and really helps to build this unsettling feeling as the story progresses. It is dark, it's weird, it's largely unsettling and a bit gross at times, so don't say I didn't warn you. But overall, personally, it's a book that I really enjoyed, and I'm very much looking forward to reading more Angela Carter books very soon. Next up then, and you probably knew it was coming even though it wasn't on my TBR for July, but look friends, I'm reading Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings, and whether or not it's on my TBR, I can't help myself. I am all in. So I read the 3rd and final book in the Live Ship Trader trilogy, and that book is Ship of Destiny. So as this book is a sequel and this trilogy itself is a sequel to another trilogy, I'm not going to get into the plot at all because I don't want to spoil anything. As ever, I'm happy to say that I was not disappointed with this one at all. It was fast paced, the character work was amazing, it went places I really wasn't expecting, and Robin Hobb rounded up the story in a really satisfying way. As ever with Robin Hobb, the plot is really well thought through. It takes time to get where you're going, and when you get there, it's so worth it. I love how Hobb paces her books, and I know it's not going to suit everybody because they're quite slow and quite character driven, which is unusual in the world of fantasy, but I honestly believe that her character work is second to none. As ever, I'm recommending this to any and all who will listen, and if it seems like something that you might enjoy, I would definitely recommend going picking up Assassin's Apprentice, which is the first book in the Farseer trilogy, and giving these books a go. Okay, so next up then, I don't even know where to begin with this one. So I listened to a book called Big Swiss by Jen Began, and I didn't know a whole lot about this book going into it, but I knew that it was supposed to be a little bit weird, and I'm good with weird. It's basically my comfort zone. So we follow our protagonist Greta, and she is a 45-year-old transcriptionist, and she works transcribing therapy sessions for a sex therapist. So she spends her days learning people's secrets and putting them down on paper. She works from home, so she lives kind of a very insular and isolated life. All's going really well until she hears the first session of a woman named Flavia, and Greta becomes obsessed with listening to her sessions. Greta has a dog named Pignon, and coincidentally happens to run into Flavia in the dog park one day, and she recognizes her straight away by her voice when she speaks to her. What follows is essentially like car crash reading. It's the kind of story that you're reading and you're like, ugh, and you just can't stop. You can't help yourself. This is so all-consuming. It's so clever. It's really funny, and generally I don't laugh aloud at books. This one genuinely had me chuckling. It is a little bit fucked up, but like in a really satisfying way. I genuinely found myself belly laughing at it, which never happens. Don't be mistaken though, this book is largely really grotesque and at times just pure rotten. Don't go into it too lightly maybe. There are very few bodily functions that aren't mentioned in this book, maybe more than a few times as well, so take from that what you will. But there are also these really tender, lovely moments, and the observations and the prose are really sharp. Overall, I just really enjoyed this one. It felt so simultaneously honest and dishonest. I don't even know how to explain that, but yeah, it was just so well written, so well done, and there is so many times in this book where I just felt myself so grossed out, but yet somehow also nodding along because I found it somehow kind of relatable. Is that even okay to say about this book? This book feels like it's a book that would really suit fans of Ottessa Moshfegh, and particularly Eileen. I loved Eileen. I didn't quite love some of her other books, but Eileen for me felt in a way, even though they're very different, in a way quite similar to the protagonist of this book. So I was definitely a little bit unsure about this one before I picked it up, but absolutely no regrets. I think it was absolutely brilliant. Next up then is one of the few books that I have bought for myself this year, and it's a really very heavily hyped book and there are very conflicting opinions about it. So what is the book? It is The Ministry of Time by Kayleigh Bradley. So we follow our unnamed protagonist and she works for a government department who have discovered time travel. And what they're doing is they are bringing people from different periods of time in the past. They're bringing them into the present, and our protagonist works as what's known as a bridge. So she lives with somebody from the past and she tries to acclimatize him to current day. In the beginning, I won't lie, I wasn't sold on this book, but I did really enjoy the writing. There are some observations in here and some lines that are just quite stunning in their execution. This book feels really genre defying because it's sci-fi, but it's also literary, it's also quite funny, it's also a romance, and it does each of those things really well. It deals with themes of colonialism, of sexism, of racism, and it brings up some really important points while also being this really kind of wholesome, heartwarming, but sometimes difficult story as well. I thought that this book was really well thought out and really well researched. There were things in this that I wouldn't even think of from current day that she thought about and worked through really well. Things that could have really affected the writing of this story and could have made the world feel really kind of lackluster and not well thought out, but I just thought it was quite brilliant. And the ending for me was really what made this book. I just thought it was so well done. It was so beautiful. While I was reading this book, I didn't actually realize that the man that she is working as a bridge for is somebody who existed in real life. So that was really interesting and sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole as well. It just added this really extra special layer to the story, and overall, as I said, I did struggle with it a bit in the beginning, but I really loved this book. Genuinely, I thought the ending was stunning. I thought it was so good. It's a real adventure story. It has so much heart. It's so beautifully written. And for me personally, this one absolutely hit the mark. After that, then I was feeling quite in the mood to pick up a bit of poetry. So I decided to go for a book that I read maybe in my late teens and early 20s and haven't read in its entirety since. And that book is a collection of poems by Sylvia Plath, and the collection of course is Ariel. So this is a collection of poems by Sylvia Plath which was published about 2 years after her death. So her husband was responsible for curating this collection. It comes with recurring themes of death, of suicide, of sadness, of gender, of the body, and so on, all the things that you would expect from Sylvia Plath. I honestly don't know what to say about it. I thought that once I finished this collection I would be gushing about it because I know when I first read it in its entirety I absolutely loved it. But there is definitely some problematic language in here that I overlooked when I was younger and now just kind of can't look past. I didn't understand some of the language, which okay is fine. There are some poems in here that I still love, particularly Poppies in October, but overall sadly it did feel just a little bit flat for me, which I'm really disappointed to say because I genuinely loved this when I first read it. So then I was in the mood for something kind of quite dark, quite gothic. I wanted like crumbling house on the edge of a cliff, and boy did I find it in The Only One Left by Riley Sager. We follow a young woman who works as a caregiver and she is assigned the role of caring for a woman who lives in a crumbling mansion on the side of a cliff, and that woman is named Lenora Hope. So Lenora Hope is absolutely infamous because she is known as the murderer of her family, although she was never convicted of it. Naturally, our protagonist is quite scared, quite intrigued, wants to know what actually happened the night of the murders, and spends the duration of the plot of this story trying to figure that out. So it's Riley Sager. We all kind of know what we're getting with Riley Sager, and nobody knows why he writes mostly from the perspective of women, and I can't tell you that, and it's just something that I tend to overlook because I know what I'm getting with him. I previously read Home Before Dark, which is a book of his that I actually really enjoyed and creeped me the hell out while I was reading it. I actually am not somebody who generally gets all that scared by books, but I had to put it down when I was reading it when it was starting to get dark and pick up something else so that I could sleep and not dream about it. I really enjoyed that one. And then the other book of his that I read was The House Across the Lake, which for the most part I did really enjoy, but unfortunately, as you might have heard, the ending to that book is controversial for a reason, and for me, I didn't like it at all. And I'm sorry to say that the only one left, which is the one I've just read, the ending again did fall quite flat for me. But overall, I just didn't mind because I really enjoyed the book. It was exactly what I needed when I needed it. And if you have any recommendations for books like this, again, I've already read Mexican Gothic, please do let me know in the comments below. If you're looking for books that are set in crumbling mansions and feel really gothic, this is definitely worth picking up, but do be forewarned that the ending might not be quite what you had hoped for. Next up then is a book that's been sitting on my shelves for a while and I've been threatening to read for ages, so eventually this past month I did listen to it on audio, and that book is The Witches of Vardø by Anja Bergman. So we are set in Norway in 1662, and it's a really dangerous time to be a woman. Basically, if you sneezed, you're accused of witchcraft. Not really, but you could be accused of witchcraft for something as simple as enjoying dancing. And as we're historically aware, once you are accused of witchcraft, that is an accusation that you actually generally could not escape from. So in this book we follow the perspectives of a few different women. The story kicks off when a woman named Sigrid, who was recently widowed, has an affair with a local merchant, and this affair is exposed and she is of course accused of witchcraft. So she's taken off to a fortress at Vardø where she awaits her trial for witchcraft. So we follow her daughter Ingeborg, and Ingeborg sets out on a quest with a girl named Maren, and Maren is the daughter of an actual witch, and they both set out trying to rescue Ingeborg's mother. We also follow a woman named Anna, I think her name is Anna Rodius, and she previously had been the mistress to the king but is now in exile in the fortress at Vardø as well. And here all of their stories intertwine. So we follow Anna in this book, and all the while we wonder to what lengths she will go to return to her privileged life at court. These women all in their own way refuse to be victims, which of course I absolutely ate up. Generally I do really love stories like this, but I couldn't help thinking pretty much all the way through that Kiran Millwood Hargrave just did it better. I read The Mercies a few years ago and these stories are quite similar. They're both about women who are accused of witchcraft, but I just feel like if you're looking for a story like this, while this is relatively enjoyable, The Mercies for me was just the better book. And then last but not least, friends, I finally read another Emily Henry book. So I read Beach Read earlier this year and I wasn't exactly enamored with it, but I said, hey look, I'll give another one of her books a go. So when I asked you guys to vote on which Emily Henry book I should read next, you overwhelmingly voted for Book Lovers. And I'm very pleased to say that you absolutely made the right choice. We follow Nora, who's a very ambitious and very busy literary agent working in New York, and her sister Libby convinces her to join her in a small town where they both can escape their lives for a few weeks before the birth of Libby's third child. So this is essentially a enemies to lover type story, and our enemy enters as Charlie, and he is an editor who works in obviously the literary sphere, so has encountered Nora before and they have not quite gotten along. Absolutely no shade at all to romance readers. I am not generally a romance reader, just personal preference, but I will say, friends, we got it right with this one. I actually really enjoyed it. I gave a romance book 4 stars. I don't think that has ever happened before. The banter is great, the pacing is really good. For me personally, the setting is like my ideal setting. What I really loved about this book is that it's absolutely so self-aware. There are so many references to the cliche tropes that come in romance novels, and I loved how Emily Henry just got things so on the nose in that way. I felt like the author just wasn't taking herself too seriously, which I really loved. I really enjoyed most of the characters, although I will say sometimes Libby for me felt like a bit of a caricature, but honestly I just didn't care. It's really fun, but it also delves into deeper themes of grief and death and isolation and anxiety and all the things that come with being a young woman and not knowing where you're going and not knowing what to do with your life. Overall, I just genuinely did really enjoy it, and the only question I have left is which Emily Henry should I read next? So that's that. That's every book in its entirety that I read in the month of July. Let me know what books were hits for you in July, what you really enjoyed, and if you want to leave a comment but you feel quite unsure about what to leave with reference to me actually enjoying a romance book for a change, leave me a comment with your favourite coloured heart in the comments down below. Otherwise, friends, as ever, I want to thank you very much for watching. I hope you're all minding yourself. I hope you're all taking care. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of my videos. Otherwise, I'll see you in another video next week. Take care, friends. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.